Scott Williams had spent 20 years trying to forget the streets of Lagos where he grew up. Now he was a name, a global CEO, a man on magazine covers, a business genius. But all it took was one red light, one glance out the window, to bring the past rushing back like a tidal wave he couldn't hold back. He had everything money could buy: black Mercedes, private jets, homes across 3 continents. But as he sat in the back seat of his luxury car that winter afternoon in Manhattan, none of it mattered. His eyes had locked onto someone he never thought he'd see again. Not like this. Elena, the girl from back home, the one who believed in him before he had even believed in himself. She stood on the sidewalk clutching a baby, her coat torn at the shoulder, her skin pale beneath the cold. Her lips were trembling as she whispered to passers-by, "Please, just some change for the baby." Scott's breath caught. His fingers gripped the armrest. His chest burned with 1,000 questions, and none of them made sense. He hadn't seen Elena in 2 decades. Not since he left Nigeria for Stanford. Not since their late-night rooftop talks and stolen kisses behind the old fish market. Not since he broke the promise to come back. And now here she was. Not in Lagos. Not in some village. But in New York City, shivering on the sidewalk, begging, with a child pressed to her chest, like it was the only warmth she had left. He could drive away, pretend he never saw her, it would be so easy. But something inside him, something buried deep, refused to let him look away. His driver asked, "Sir, do we continue?" Scott didn't answer. He opened the car door. The cold slapped him in, the face like guilt wearing winter gloves. "Elena," he called softly, like the name itself was too sacred to shout. She didn't turn. Her eyes were low, cast at the ground, ashamed, afraid, too tired to hope. "Elena," he said again, louder this time. Her head lifted, and in that single second, time cracked open. Her eyes widened, her mouth parted slightly. She blinked, as if not trusting what she saw. "Scott," she whispered, and just like that the past fell between them like a forgotten song remembered in perfect tune. They stood like 2 ghosts, facing each other in a city that didn't care about either of them. His eyes darted to the baby. The baby looked barely 1. Was it hers? Who was the father? Why was she on the street? "Elena, what happened?" His voice cracked. He wasn't used to it. Scott Williams didn't crack. Not in boardrooms, not in courtrooms. But now, she smiled painfully. "Life," she said. "Life happened." Her eyes fell to the pavement. She didn't want to explain. Maybe she thought he wouldn't understand. Maybe she didn't want pity. But he wasn't thinking like a billionaire anymore. He wasn't thinking like a man who had walked away from his past. He was just thinking like the boy who used to sit on a rooftop with a dreamer, who painted futures in the sky. "Come with me," he said quietly. Elena's eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Was it fear? Was it disbelief? Or was it just the pure exhaustion of someone who had nothing left to lose? She hesitated. Then she shook her head. "I can't. I don't want anything from you, Scott. Not now. Not after all this time." He took a step closer. "I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a seat in the car, a warm place to rest, for you, for the baby." The baby whimpered as if understanding. She looked around. People passed by without seeing her. Just another mother begging in the cold. Another nobody in a city built to ignore people like her. But Scott didn't ignore her, and finally, quietly, she nodded. He helped her into the car. The heater wrapped around them like a blanket of mercy. Neither of them spoke for the first few seconds. Then she said softly, "His name is Cairo." Scott looked at the baby, then back at her. His heart dropped. "Elena, is he?" She didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any truth he'd ever heard. The silence inside the car was thick, almost suffocating. The kind of silence that's not empty, but full of things neither of them knew how to say. Scott looked at the baby again, Cairo. His cheeks were red from the cold, tiny fingers curled tightly into his mother's coat. Elena stroked his head gently, her hand trembling. Not from the cold, but maybe from the fear of what this meeting might bring. Or maybe just from finally being seen. "Is he mine?" Scott asked again, this time softer, like he wasn't sure if he wanted the answer. Elena didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Cairo. Then she nodded once Scott inhaled sharply. It was like the air had suddenly been pulled out of the car. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, almost in a whisper. "You were gone," she said quietly, "and I knew you weren't coming back." He swallowed the knot in his throat. "I deserved to know." Elena finally looked at him, eyes tired but not angry. "What would it have changed, Scott? You were chasing billion-dollar deals. I was surviving. There was no room for someone like me in your world." He felt a sting in her words, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. The driver kept his eyes forward, silent and professional, pretending not to hear the emotional storm, unraveling in the back seat. Scott looked at Elena again. Even in her pain, even beneath layers of exhaustion and cold, she still had that quiet strength. The same fire he had fallen in love with when they were 17 and dreaming of escape under the Lagos moonlight. Only now, that fire was flickering, barely alive. "Where are you staying?" he asked. She let out a bitter laugh. "Wherever. It's not raining. Sometimes the shelters let me in if it's not full. Most nights, and it's just a corner and a blanket." Scott's jaw clenched. The thought of her, of his son, sleeping in alleys while he dined in five-star hotels made something inside him twist violently. "I can fix this," he said suddenly. "I can get you a place, somewhere warm, safe for both of you." "I didn't ask for help," she said quickly, her pride poking through the cracks. "I know, but I'm offering it anyway." She stared at him for a long moment. "What do you want in return?" He shook his head. "Nothing, just let me help." She looked at him like she didn't recognize this version of him. Maybe she didn't. Maybe he didn't either. Scott pulled out his phone and made a call. "James, I need a suite opened at the Park Avenue residence. 2 bedrooms. Stock it with baby supplies, food, everything, right now." He ended the call and turned back to her. "It'll be ready in an hour. Until then, you're staying with me." Elena's lips parted, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, then said, "Because I should have never left you behind." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked it away quickly. "You left because you had a dream, and I left you behind to chase it. But maybe the real dream was right here the whole time." Elena didn't reply. She just held Cairo tighter. Scott leaned back in his seat, heart heavy with guilt and something dangerously close to hope. For the first time in years, his empire felt empty. All the deals, the wealth, the power, it all meant nothing if the people who mattered were suffering while he looked the other way. He looked out the window at the city racing by. He had stepped out of the car that day, thinking he was just helping someone from his past. But deep down he knew, this wasn't just about Elena. This was about rewriting everything he thought he knew about success. And maybe, just maybe, finding a second chance with the only woman who ever truly knew his heart. The ride to Park Avenue felt longer than it was. Neither Elena nor Scott spoke much. Cairo had fallen asleep, cheek resting against his mother's shoulder. Scott kept stealing glances, not just at the baby, but at her, trying to understand how a woman once so full of light ended up buried in shadows. The Park Avenue residence was one of Scott's hidden gems, a private luxury apartment he used only when he needed absolute peace. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows, the smell of fresh-cut flowers always lingering in the lobby. Elena looked out the car window as they pulled up, confusion creeping onto her face. "You live here?" she asked, almost suspicious. Scott shook his head. "It's mine, yes, but I don't live here. I just keep it for when I need to breathe." She didn't respond. When the doorman opened the door for them, she hesitated. Her shoes were soaked. Her coat smelled of damp alleyways. She looked down at herself, then at the polished marble floor inside the lobby and almost turned back. Scott gently touched her arm. "You belong here more than I ever did." That made her eyes soften, just a little. They rode the elevator in, silence to the top floor. When the doors opened, the warmth of the space greeted them like a long-lost friend. The lights were dim, cozy, the furniture soft and clean. And in the far corner of the living room, the city skyline sparkled behind thick glass. Elena stepped in slowly, Cairo still asleep in her arms. She looked around like it was a dream she wasn't ready to wake from. "This is too much," she whispered. "No," Scott said firmly. "Living on the street with a baby is too much. This is basic humanity." A team had already delivered supplies: diapers, formula, blankets, clothes. Elena stared at them, her lips quivering. "How did you do all this so fast?" He gave a tired half smile. "I may be a bastard, but I'm a rich, efficient one." She let out a short breath, almost a laugh. Almost. He led her to the guest room. "It's yours for as long as you need it. You and Cairo." She gently placed her sleeping child on the bed, pulling the soft blanket over him. Then she stood there silently, hands by her side, eyes full. "You can rest," Scott said gently. "You don't have to talk. Not yet." But Elena turned to him. "You want to know how I ended up like this?" He shook his head. "Only if you want to tell me." She nodded once, slow. Her voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that had told this story to herself many times in the dark. "I stayed back. After you left for Stanford, I got into a local art program. I was good, Scott. I really was. But there's only so much talent can do when life starts hitting." She sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes locked on nothing in particular. "Then my mom got sick. Cancer. I dropped out to take care of her, worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses, selling paintings at street corners, but it was never enough." Scott listened, saying nothing, his heart sinking deeper with every word. "After she passed, I was already buried in debt. Then came the wrong guy, promises, lies. You know how that story ends." She didn't need to say more. The bruises on her soul were louder than anything. "Got pregnant. He left before Cairo was even born. I tried to make it work. But nobody wants to hire a pregnant girl with no degree and no family." Scott clenched his jaw. "Elena," she shook her head. "Don't say sorry. It doesn't change anything." "But I can change something," he said. "I can help from now on." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "I'm not your responsibility, Scott." He stepped closer. "Maybe not. But that baby is mine. And you were always more than just someone I left behind. Maybe I forgot that. Maybe I buried it, but it's still true." The tears came quietly down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly. "I'm tired," she whispered. "Rest," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a very long time, Elena believed him. The morning sun filtered softly through the wide windows, bathing the apartment in golden light. It was the kind of morning that felt calm, like a fresh start. Elena stirred on the sofa bed, her arms wrapped around Cairo, who was still sleeping soundly. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she hadn't woken up afraid. She hadn't heard sirens or the shuffle of cold shoes in a shelter hallway. Just peace. Scott had barely slept. He sat at the edge of the kitchen counter, coffee in hand, eyes staring out at the skyline, mind racing. He wasn't used to feeling like this, the unsure, exposed. Business deals were clean, emotions were messy. But this felt necessary. For once he wasn't calculating profits. He was trying to rebuild something real. Elena entered the kitchen slowly, wearing the robe someone from the concierge team had left for her. She looked softer this morning, still tired but a little more herself. "Morning," she said, voice scratchy but gentle. Scott looked up and smiled. "Morning. There's tea or coffee, whatever you want." She sat across from him, brushing, a loose strand of hair from her face. "This place feels unreal." "You get used to it," he replied, then paused. "But you shouldn't have to get used to surviving." She sighed. "I'm grateful, Scott. I really am. But I still don't understand what happens now." He nodded. "That's fair. I mean, what is this? Just temporary shelter? Some long overdue guilt trip you're trying to fix?" Scott leaned forward. "No, it's more than that. I want to be in Cairo's life. I want to help you. Not because I feel guilty, but because I should have been there from the beginning." Eleanor looked away. "You left because you had to, Scott. I don't blame you for chasing something better. But I blame myself, he said. I promised I'd come back for you. I promised we'd make it work. But I took the first chance I got and ran. I never even looked back. Her eyes met his then. There was no anger in them, only hurt. I waited, she said simply, for a long time. That hit him harder than any insult would have. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, he said. But maybe we can take small steps, start again, however that looks. She hesitated. You don't know me anymore, Scott. I'm not the same girl from Mushin who used to paint dreamscapes on concrete walls. And I'm not the boy who promised her the world without knowing how to give it, he replied. But maybe we can meet each other where we are now. Just then, Cairo's soft cry interrupted the moment. Elena rose to check on him, and Scott followed behind. He watched as she lifted her son gently, humming an old lullaby in Yoruba under her breath, a tune he remembered her mother singing years ago. The memory stung and soothed him at the same time. Can I hold him? He asked, nervous. Elena hesitated, then nodded. She handed Cairo over, her fingers brushing against Scott's as she did. The child blinked up at him with curious brown eyes. His eyes. A soft coo escaped the baby's lips as Scott rocked him gently in his arms. I miss so much, Scott whispered. You didn't know, Elena replied, but I should have asked. I should have checked in on you. I let distance excuse my silence. They sat together on the couch, Cairo nestled between them. It felt fragile, like a moment that could disappear with one wrong word, but also like something new was taking shape. Elena turned to him. What if we try, Scott? Not for me, not even for you, but for him. Scott nodded slowly. We take it one day at a time. She gave a small smile. One day at a time. And for the first time in years, Scott Williams felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Not in a boardroom, not on a yacht, but here in a quiet apartment, holding a piece of the life he thought he had lost forever. The next few days passed like a quiet storm. Scott arranged everything. A full-time pediatrician for Cairo, a legal team to begin paperwork for support, and a private therapist for Elena if she wanted it. He didn't push anything. He just offered. The old Scott would have tried to control the situation, manage it like one of his global projects, but this wasn't a business deal. This was personal. Elena was slow to open up. She stayed in the apartment mostly, stepping out only. With Cairo for brief walks when the sun was gentle, Scott gave her space. But every morning, without fail, they had breakfast together. Toast, eggs, tea, simple, grounding. And every evening, Scott returned from work early to check in. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But each day, the silence between them grew more comfortable, not heavy. Then one night it all cracked open. It had been raining, and Elena was sitting by the window, Cairo asleep in her arms. Scott had just entered, loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of water. He looked over and saw her staring out at the city, eyes unfocused, lost in something far away. You okay? He asked. She didn't answer right away. I've never told anyone, she said finally, about how bad it really got. He walked over slowly and sat beside her. There were nights I thought we wouldn't make it, not just financially, I mean emotionally, mentally. There were nights I was ready to disappear. I used to look at Cairo and wonder if he'd be better off without me. I didn't want to feel that, but I did. Scott felt his throat tighten. He reached out but stopped just before touching her shoulder. You didn't deserve that kind of pain, he said softly. No one does, she whispered. But it found me anyway. There was a pause, rain tapping softly against the glass. The hum of the city outside muffled by silence. I'm sorry I wasn't there, he said, and for once he meant it in more ways than words could hold. Not just financially, not just physically, but emotionally. I should have checked in, I should have written, I left you to carry everything alone. Eleanor looked at him, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. You can't rewrite the past. Scott, I know, he replied, but maybe we can write the rest together. He wasn't asking for love. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a chance to be present, to be better, to be something real. She looked down, at Cairo, then back at him. You know, I used to imagine what you'd be like as a father. Scott smiled faintly. And? I imagined someone bold, kind, stubborn, maybe a little bossy. He chuckled. Sounds like me. But I never thought I'd actually get to see it. Neither did I. There was a long, full silence after that, the kind that didn't need filling. Then softly she said, "Maybe you can take him to the park tomorrow. He likes the swings, even if he just stares at the other kids. For now." Scott's eyes lit up. "I'd love that." She smiled faintly. "Let's start there." And with those 4 simple words, "Let's start there," something shifted. Not a miracle, not a fairy tale, just 2 people, tired and scarred, agreeing to move forward, one moment at a time. That night, as Scott sat on the guest room floor, beside Cairo's crib, humming a lullaby he barely remembered from his own childhood in Lagos, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, not success, not achievement, but something real. The next morning was bright, unusually so for New York this time of year. The rain had finally passed, leaving behind a kind of freshness that made even the cold seem kind. Scott stood in front of the mirror, tying Cairo's tiny blue scarf with a level of concentration he usually reserved for board presentations. Elena stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a smile that crept slowly onto her lips. "You're doing it wrong," she said. "I am not," Scott said, looking defensive but amused. "His neck isn't a business deal, Scott," she teased. "You don't need to strangle it into submission." He laughed, embarrassed, and loosened the scarf a little. "There, now he can actually breathe." She took Cairo gently and adjusted his hat, kissing his forehead. "He likes the swings more when you push from the front. He gets scared if it goes too high." Scott nodded like he was being handed instructions to run a country. "Got it. Push gently. Smile. Don't treat it like a stock exchange." "Exactly." He hesitated at the door. "You sure you don't want to come?" She smiled, soft and knowing. "I'll come next time. I just need a quiet morning." He understood. Some healing happens slowly, like a wound you don't uncover too fast because the air still stings. At the park, Cairo sat wide-eyed in the swing, tiny fingers gripping the chains, head bobbing every time Scott gently pushed him. The other children ran, laughed, shouted. But Cairo stayed quiet, not afraid, just watchful. Like his mother, Scott knelt in front of him. "You're like her, aren't you? Strong, quiet, watching everything before you make your move." Cairo babbled something that sounded like a laugh. It hit Scott deep, deeper than he expected. For a moment, he just watched the little boy sway gently, his breath making tiny clouds in the cold morning air. A woman nearby, maybe mid-40s, gave him a small smile. "First time?" "Yeah," he said. "Beautiful boy," she added. "Thank you." Scott realized he had never said those words before. "My son," out loud, to anyone. It felt like opening a door that had been sealed for too long. When they returned, Elena was on the balcony, wrapped in a soft shawl, a half-drunk mug of tea next to her. She looked more rested than he had seen her in days. "Did he like it?" she asked. He didn't cry. "I'm calling it a win," Scott replied. Lifting Cairo from the stroller, Elena smiled. "Good. Next time try the little blue car in the sandbox." "He likes wheels," Scott raised a brow. "This baby has preferences." "Oh, he's a king, he just can't speak yet." They both laughed. Easy, natural. Later that evening, as they sat across the table sharing a quiet dinner, Elena finally asked the question that had lingered between them. "What now, Scott?" He looked up. "What do you mean?" "I mean us. This. What are we building? Is this just your way of doing right by your child? Or are we rewriting something?" Scott set his fork down. He didn't want to answer too fast. This needed truth, not charm. "I don't know all the answers yet, but I know this, what we had. It wasn't just teenage love, it was real. We were just too young to know how to hold it." Elena looked away for a second, then back at him. "And now? Now I'm not running anymore. I'm here. Not as a hero, not as a millionaire, just as a man who never stopped loving you, even when he didn't deserve you." Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached across the table and touched his hand. "I don't need a savior, Scott. I just need someone who stays." He gripped her hand back gently. Then I'll stay. And that night, as the city lights blinked softly in the distance and Cairo slept between them on the couch, his tiny breaths rising and falling like a steady beat, it finally felt like a home, not because of the luxury, not because of the address, but because the three of them were together, and maybe, just maybe, love was getting a second chance. Weeks passed, not in a blur, but with purpose, with healing, with rediscovery. Elena started painting again. At first, just sketches, quiet lines on a canvas in the early hours of the morning when Cairo was still asleep and the city hadn't fully woken up. She didn't say much about it. Scott didn't ask too many questions. He just bought her the supplies and made sure the light in the guest room was perfect for working. One afternoon, he came home early from a shareholders' meeting, tired, worn. The usual fake smiles and performative handshakes had drained him. But when he stepped into the apartment and saw Elena sitting on the floor with Cairo, a small canvas leaning against the wall, everything inside him softened. "What's that?" he asked. She turned, eyes lit up in a way he hadn't seen before. "It's Lagos," she said, motioning to the unfinished painting. Not the one in postcards, the real one, the smell of corn on the roadside, the burnt orange rooftops, the way the light bounces off dirty puddles after rain. He walked closer, and there it was, life, real life, captured in rough strokes and soft colors, her memories, their roots. "You're amazing," he whispered. She smirked. "I know." Scott laughed, really laughed, not the polished laugh he gave investors, but the boyish one Elena used to hear back when he was just Scotty from Ikorodu, and the only thing he owned was a torn backpack. That night, as they sat beside each other on the sofa, Elena sipping from her tea, Scott feeding Cairo mashed sweet potatoes, the distance between them felt smaller than ever. It was like they were learning to exist again, not as ex-lovers, not as broken people, but as a strange, tender sort of family. But not everything was easy. One evening, Scott's assistant called. "She's been snooping," he said. A journalist from the Daily Times. Apparently someone tipped her off, said the billionaire Scott Williams is hiding a woman and an unknown child in his penthouse. Scott's stomach dropped. How much does she know? Not enough. But if this goes public, he knew the rest. It would become a spectacle, a scandal, tabloid headlines. African billionaire's love child discovered after years in hiding. His board would ask questions. Investors might panic. And worse, Elena would be dragged into a storm she didn't ask for. Scott paced the room after the call. Elena was in the kitchen, humming softly while feeding Cairo a banana. She didn't know. Not yet. And for the first time he felt afraid. Not of losing a deal or facing public scrutiny, but of losing the fragile peace they had built. That night after Cairo was asleep, he sat with her on the balcony. "There's something I have to tell you," he began. She sensed the change in his voice immediately. "What is it?" "A journalist might be onto us. Someone leaked something." Her body stiffened. "What do you mean, onto us?" "Someone knows you're here. With me. With our son. They're fishing for a story." Elena's face fell. She stood up, stepping back from him. "So now I'm your scandal?" "No," he said quickly, rising to meet her. "You're my truth. But the world, they'll try to turn this into something ugly." Her voice broke. "I can't survive another storm, Scott. I've just started to breathe again." He stepped closer. "Then I'll protect you. I swear I'll do whatever it takes to keep both of you safe. I've fought boardrooms, politicians, tycoons. I'll fight this too." Helena looked into his eyes, searching, testing, and then slowly she let out a shaky breath. "I don't care about your money," she said. "I care about us. If this is real, then you fight not for the headlines, but for me, for our son." Scott placed a hand on her cheek. "I'm already in the ring." And in that moment it wasn't about fortune, it wasn't about fear. It was about two people daring to build a life in a world that only believed in power, not in love. But Scott Williams was ready to change that. The story broke 3 days later, not as a tabloid scandal, not as a hit piece, but as a carefully written, deeply human profile in the Times. A journalist named Ayanda Mbele, a young Nigerian reporter rising fast in New York, had approached Scott with facts already in hand. She didn't come to destroy him. She came with curiosity and perhaps a quiet sense of justice. "I'm not interested in making a mess of your life," she had said in the meeting, "but people deserve to see the truth, especially when it doesn't fit the usual storylines." So Scott did something he hadn't done in years. He told the truth. He told the world about Elena, about Cairo, about love lost and found, and everything in between. When the article dropped, the public expected drama. What they got instead was something raw and beautiful. The headline read, "The billionaire, the baby, and the woman he shouldn't have left behind." Eleanor's name trended for hours, but not in mockery, in admiration. Her paintings, quietly posted to a forgotten blog from years ago, resurfaced. Galleries inquired. Women shared stories of single motherhood, of resilience, of being left behind and standing anyway. And Scott, he didn't lose his investors. He didn't lose his company. If anything, he gained something no quarterly report could ever measure: respect. People didn't see a broken man dragged down by a hidden past. They saw a man standing in it, unapologetically. One night after Cairo had fallen asleep and the world had moved on to its next trending topic, Scott stood beside Elena in the studio space he had built just for her, a whole room flooded with light, filled with canvases, paint, and the hum of quiet healing. "No," Elena said. "I used to dream of a life like this, not the money, not the fame, just peace, a home, a place where I could be myself and not survive, live." Scott nodded, watching her. "You have that now, and you built it. I just opened the door." She turned to him. "And what do you dream of now, Scott?" He smiled, tired but whole. "Of mornings with Cairo, of coffee on balconies, of watching you turn blank canvases into magic, of love that doesn't need to hide." She took his hand. "Then stay in the dream with me." No promises were made that night. No rings, no speeches. Just two hands holding each other. Just one. Small child sleeping peacefully in the next room, unaware that he had brought two broken hearts back together. Just a quiet understanding that sometimes life gives you one more chance, not to erase the past, but to choose differently in the present. And Scott Williams, the billionaire, the strategist, the man who had once built empires with numbers, finally understood. The greatest thing he ever built was home.